Sekiro Shadows Die Twice is one of my favorite games, and for a number of reasons. It's got an absolutely beautiful landscape, some interesting encounters, an incredible soundtrack like holy wow, but most importantly, it's got some of the best combat ever committed to disc. Whether it be the climactic boss battles or even things as small as visual and audio cues, everything is always given the utmost attention. Minute details that are often shoved to the back of other studios' games are always on high throughout the entirety of Sekiro. All noises serve a purpose. The deep and purposely loud of a death blow counter lets you know that the battle is absolutely about to start. And things like the differences between a regular deflection or the sharper of a perfect deflect show the importance of timing. What makes Sekiro's combat so brilliant in my eyes is how tailored the experience is. While it lacks the variation and choice of multiple weapons and armor sets like other From Software games, the combat is perfected by every enemy and environment being entirely focused on how the player works. Wolf, the player character, is small, incredibly fast, and easily toppled, but his tools, like the jump counter, the Mikra counter, prosthetic tools, his katana, Kusabi Maru, and others make him incredibly fun to control. By having only one weapon, no enemies are overly easy and none are crushingly difficult, at least not due to the player's gear. By taking the risk of making a game they knew would only work with a particular playstyle, FromSoft succeeds in my opinion by making an entirely specific game. Sekiro allows for only one playstyle, but because of these limitations was able to expand it in a way that I didn't originally find possible. Practically everything your opponents do is purposefully made to reflect the range, attack speed, and damage of Kusabi Maru, and unlike other games in the Soulsborne series, their fast combos aren't just for show. The game makes an introduction to the posture system, a mechanic that asks not of the player's ability to reduce their enemy's health to zero, but rather their posture. Posture is indicated by a yellow, and eventually orange, bar at the top and bottom of the screen, top for the opponent and bottom for Wolf. Landing blocked attacks on an opponent's sword and perfect deflecting their own attacks progressively breaks their posture until they become available for a death blow. Enemies like bosses and mini-bosses can have multiple death blow markers, and thus need their posture to be broken in accordance with the number of markers. Another interesting thing about bosses is the relation between their health and posture. Some special enemies, like bosses and mini-bosses, regain posture too quickly for the player to defeat them just by deflecting, but posture is regained slower as one's health becomes lower, which creates interesting scenarios in which the player will have to decide whether to attack the posture or the health, which is always dependent on the current fight. And there is no better enemy to explain posture than Genichiro Ashina, the game's third main boss. Genichiro's fight is absolutely incredible, entirely devoid of any unfair mechanics, but is still crushingly hard. This is the game's first true test. Earlier bosses like Yobu and Lady Butterfly and any regular overworld enemies can be beaten through almost any means, like dodging and attacking, spamming special moves, or even mashing the attack button for some, but Genichiro throws all that in the garbage. If the player does not know how to deflect by the time they reach Genichiro, class is in session. His attacks can destroy health bars, and timing a deflection poorly in the middle of his fast, advancing combos can mean the fight. The entire thing is short, around 5 minutes, but practically any mistake in that time can cost the player a life. It's a truly incredible boss, and one I think anyone who's even slightly interested in what I've been saying should check out, but there's something else that needs noting. Genichiro is a teacher. I, admittedly, was not entirely sold on this game my first playthrough, until I toppled Genichiro for the first time and had finished the entire game by the next week. Sekiro's combat is so incredibly complicated, and not much is explained to the player in the quick pop-up tutorials that permeate the opening areas, but Genichiro makes sure the player knows all of it. Niche details like the difference in audio and visual of a regular and perfect deflection, the fact that holding the block button slows your character but regains posture much faster, and others all become so incredibly clear because they have to. Without even the most minute details of the combat at the forefront of the player's mind during the showdown, the fight may as well be over. Now, let's get to the interesting part. The growth. The final thing that makes Sekiro's combat perfect is the scaling of difficulty and the clear improvement the player is forced to make throughout the game. On my first playthrough, Genichiro absolutely destroyed me more times than I care to recall, and I think it took a good 2 or 3 hours to finally beat him. All the footage used in this is from my third playthrough, the one I've been completing throughout this week, and this time I beat Genichiro the first attempt with no hassle. I wasn't even properly prepared. I had just been hopping around his area and happened to accidentally jump into the arena, but the fact that I've grown from my playthroughs, my knowledge of his attacks, combos, and how to counter them allowed me to topple him without a second thought, and that's beautiful. Another great thing about the fight is just how open it is in terms of strategy. Genichiro has these leaping jump attacks that can be deflected and then jump countered, Nikri countered, or deflected again depending on his follow-up that is randomly determined in order to destroy his posture, or he can dodge to the side and strike him to take away a bit of health, so as to more quickly deteriorate his posture later on. The game wants the player to experiment, to have that growth, to come back a second, third, fourth time and see what they can do with their new tools. Finally, we come to Resurrection, one of the most underrated parts of the game, despite being the reason for the subtitle. One of the most common complaints for Soulsborne games, and a valid one at that, is in regards to enemies' ability to one-shot the player. One-shot meaning to lower the player character's health to 0 with just one hit, usually with not a lot of time to react or telegraph. Resurrection fixes this problem entirely with the ability to guarantee to be able to survive at least one hit from any enemy. In fact, as the game progresses, the player can find another 2 resurrected nodes, as they're called, to use mid-battle. The game does not do a whole lot of explaining on this front, so I'll take it upon myself to clear the air. Dying at any point during a battle for the first time brings up a screen with the ability to revive or die. There is no consequence for reviving the first time, so unless you've given an attempt at a boss, revive no matter what. After this, a black stripe will cover the resurrection nodes placed above the health bar, meaning they will be unusable until a death flows them. If the player is in the middle of a boss fight, dies, resurrects, and proceeds to take a life bar from the boss, they will be able to resurrect again so long as one of the pink circles above their health bar is full. If a player takes a boss's health bar, dies, revives, and dies again, there will be no second revive unless another life bar has been taken and the player will be sent back to their last checkpoint, or Sculptor's Item. All of the footage from this was taken from only the first few areas because I wanted to avoid spoilers. If any of this footage or any of what I've been saying sounds interesting to you, I implore you to pick it up. It's challenging, but immensely rewarding. Offers some of the best controls to ever grace this generation. It's available on Steam, Xbox One, and PS4, as well as their next-gen counterparts, so if you're a fan of these kind of games, you're kind of out of excuses. I loved this game to bits the first time, and I still do the fourth time.